Greetings and welcome back. We're on to the next lecture, which is Foundations of Epistemology, Part 1. I'm Dr. T. Let's get started. All right, so Foundations of Epistemology. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about a couple different points. I'm going to define epistemology more clearly, make sure you lock it in your mind. It's the first branch of philosophy, but I'm going to give you a formal definition and just make sure you lock the concept in. I'm going to briefly talk about why we should study epistemology or why study knowledge at all or why knowledge can essentially be complicated sometimes. And then finally, I'm going to present an epistemological thought experiment to help you truly understand the importance of epistemology, as well as just grasp the big idea, because epistemology is at the heart of the works you've read in this unit. It's at the heart of Descartes' work, as well as John Locke's work, because there's various questions built into the works that you read. However, the bigger picture is all about epistemology and that which we know or don't know, okay? So epistemology, formally defined, is the philosophical study of knowledge. Make sure you lock that definition into your mind, okay? So epistemological thinkers ask questions such as, where does knowledge come from? What counts as knowledge? And what are the limits of knowledge? If you think back to the works you've read of both Descartes and Locke, they looked at these questions in some way, shape, or form, and they both answered them very differently. We'll talk about that more when we dig into and analyze their works, but I just want to kind of lay the foundation here. So, the philosophical study of knowledge is how we define epistemology, and these are some of the core questions. So, why study knowledge at all? Knowledge seems like common sense, right? We just know things, or at least that's what we feel. But when you really think about it, knowledge can be complicated for several different reasons. Because knowledge is limited, because we can only know from our own perspective, and because sometimes our knowing how I know something versus how you know something may get lost in translation or in trying to communicate what we think we know or what we think we're even understanding of what the other person knows. Okay? So here I have an example, the world. But mind you, even though we're going to use the example of the world, I'll actually talk through it in two different ways because the world can count for anything, the universe, life, money, happiness. So I'll talk through it as the world, but also as money so that you can see two different examples, okay? So my view of the world is limited, right? I can only know what I know of my experience of the world. So therefore, that's the one piece of what makes knowledge complicated is that our knowledge pool, if you will, is somewhat limited from our own experiences or our own mental functioning. Okay, we could do the same thing with money. My view of money is limited due to my experiences. My experiences with money, how I've learned over the years to budget or how to spend money. Also, thinking about my currency within my own culture, right? So, my worldview of money is somewhat limited. My knowledge of money is limited in that way. All right, so my explanation of my view of the world. Am I communicating what I know clearly? And then, even when I communicate it clearly, can it truly be representative of what the thing itself is, right? So, if I were to define to you how I see the world, am I truly giving you a picture, a full picture of the world itself? Okay? Or if I tell you what I know of money, like what I know money to be, am I truly grasping all of what money entails because my view is limited, right? In addition to my language around my knowledge is limited. So therefore, even what I can express essentially becomes only a partial representation of the thing itself that I claim to know. All right. And the final point, your mental representation of my explanation of my view of the world. So the question is, when you hear me, for example, tell you what I know of the world or of money, basically what you hear, you have to then interpret to what you already know of the world and incorporate it into the perspective you currently hold, which then alters knowledge in some way, right? So it's not necessarily going to be a direct reflection of the knowledge or the image of the world or money that I hold within me. It's going to now be a version that's been translated into however you interpret knowledge. So I know that may have seemed complicated. Hopefully, it made some sense to you. But essentially, it gets to why knowledge is not as clear cut as it seems on the surface. Okay, we can only know in the world as much as our own lens captures, and trying to translate that sometimes across language, culture, or just generally from person to person can complicate that which we claim to know. And is our perception a true reflection of the reality? Okay? So that's part one of why we should study epistemology or dig into knowledge, because it's not so clear cut. What we think we may know may not be, it may be more surface than we realize. All right, so here's a little thought experiment to help you truly wrap your mind around this notion of epistemology, okay? If I were to show you three different images, say I showed you a pencil or even a pen that I have here. Imagine I showed you an image of the word love, okay? And then finally, imagine that I showed you an image of the pop star, deceased now pop star, Michael Jackson, okay? And then if I were to ask you, after showing you these three images, do you know what these things are? Many of you, most of you, I'm guessing, would likely say yes, and you'd have similar answers. You would say, oh, it's a pen or a pencil, it's Michael Jackson, it's love. Okay, I know what these things are. But the question of epistemology is, do you truly know what these things are? Do you truly know what a pencil is, the essence of a pencil, if it's used in some other way? For example, is it possible that a pencil can really be a hair stick to hold up a bun, a messy bun? Is it possible that a pencil or pencils, plural, can be drumsticks to someone else, right? If one person's using it as a pencil or writing utensil and someone else is using it to create air drums, then the question is, if they know it to be two different things, how do we truly know the use of a pencil besides what we've maybe agreed upon in society? But that can still be a limited piece of knowledge, right? So, going on to our next example, love. We feel like we know what love is, but we say we love our parents. We may love a significant other. Myself personally, I love pizza. But I use the same word love, but I use it for various things. And I don't love pizza the same as I love my daughter, for example, or a family member, right? So the question is, what does it really mean to know love, especially if we're using it in all these different applications, okay? And can you ever truly know what it means? And going back to the last slide, if I explain it, if I try to explain love to the best of my ability, will you then know the same version of love that I've explained, or will I only be able to give a partial representation of love itself? All right. And finally, Michael Jackson, if I were to show you that image, is it enough if we recognize him to say that we know Michael Jackson because we could recognize an image? Or do we have to know his biography and know more about him? Do we have to know his childhood? If we saw a really great Michael Jackson impersonator standing next to him, would we be able to then know the difference essentially and say that we truly know him? Okay. So those are the questions of epistemology. What does it truly mean to know a person, a thing, or even an abstract idea like love? These are epistemological questions. All right. And finally, this kind of gets back to the value of epistemology or why study epistemology. Epistemology is essentially necessary for philosophical endeavors, okay? In the experiment we just did, when you think of it, each of those examples help us understand the first piece that I was talking about of why knowledge is more complicated than we first realized, right? We all have different perceptions of the world, of the items in the world, of the ideas such as love, happiness, etc. in the world. Our perception of colors, our perception, how we view things, basically colors our knowledge and how we present that knowledge. One person's pencil, as I gave the example, is another person's drumstick, right? Or how I perceive the color blue may be different than you understand the color blue, even though we're looking at the exact same color, or so it seems, okay? So, therefore, because knowledge can be complicated in this vast way, it behooves us to examine knowledge claims from the concrete things such as this computer is a computer or this table is a table to the abstract ideas such as success or beauty. We could be having a conversation about success, but if we know success as two different things, are we truly having the same conversation? Are we clear on what we're talking about? And will we actually make progress in our conversation if we don't get to the core of what it means to know success or beauty or whatever idea we're discussing, okay? So when you think about things like the nature of human beings or existence or virtue or goodness, right? These are things that these philosophers that we're covering have dug into epistemologically to try to understand. What truly do we know about the nature of people? What do we know about what it means to exist? And once we can understand the foundation of a thing and what it means to know that thing, we can then build upon it to create a bigger theory or a deeper discussion from that point. So, hence why epistemology is necessary. Okay? So I hope that that helped you truly wrap your mind around the idea of epistemology and lock it into your mind. Essentially, why we should study epistemology or knowledge at all. And then also just the big picture of why these philosophers, such as Descartes and Locke, who you're reading, decided to investigate these ideas in relation to epistemological endeavors. Okay? All right, so that is it for this lecture. Thank you so much, as always. And you can continue on to the next lecture. I'll see you soon. Take care.